Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Relationship Success Support Hangout. Tonight, I have with me Joe, who is from California but is currently staying in South Africa. Hi, Joe.
Hi, everybody.
And I have also with me Marlon from Mexico. Hi, Marlon.
Hey guys, nice to be here.
Okay, so tonight is a really cool hangout for two reasons. First one is it is Marlon's birthday. Happy birthday, Marlon.
Thanks a lot,
Happy
guys. What a better
birthday.
way to celebrate! Yay!
Yeah, thanks for being here, even on your birthday. Pretty amazing. Okay, the
By all
second
means.
reason, cool. The second reason is that, usually on these hangouts, I can relate to the topic. I have experienced it in some way or another. But tonight, we're talking about the experience and the conviction that relationships are not for me. And that is something I haven't really experienced. So I'm really looking forward to see what's going to open up and what you guys have to share tonight. Okay, so first to clarify, Marlon has had this experience before, this point of feeling that, relationships are just not for her. And, as much as possible, tried to steer clear of relationships in thought, word, and deed, just not have anything to do with it. But she actually is currently in a relationship, so she is working through this. So, all right, let's get started. If I look at these words, relationships are not for me, there's two possibilities that I consider. Okay, firstly, either person feels that relationships are silly, a waste of time, like beneath them, like relationships are not for me, or that they don't feel worthy of a relationship. So, can you guys tell me, am I onto something? Which one do you feel relates more closely to your experience? Joe, what do you think?
Well, it's hard to say that it's one over the other, because for me, there are shades of both, but definitely I would lean more towards the experience of feeling like unworthy, like I don't deserve a relationship, and I am not good enough for a relationship. But at the same time, there would also be these thoughts of, oh, but look at all the problems people have in relationships. Look at how how much stress people get into. Look at how much financial difficulty it is to live as a couple. Maybe it's smarter to not have a relationship. So there's those justifications that come in as well.
Fascinating. Yeah. So you've got actually the polarity playing out the whole time between I'm above it and I'm below it type of thing.
Yes.
How was the how was it for you, Marlon?
I can relate exactly to the same polarity. First of all, of desiring it because, it's like this one thing that everyone is supposed to be doing. But at the same time, after having certain relationships that weren't supportive at all, well, for the most part, or ended up in destructive ways, I was just like, nah, I don't want it any longer because it is a waste of my time. I only get into problems. I get the other person into these depressions once that we part ways. I don't want to be living with this fear of losing that person. That sucks. I'd rather be by myself. And as Joe was sharing, like creating these justifications of, I'm just fine by myself. I'm over it. I don't really need one. And whenever you see even couples walking on the street, it's like, like you feel tense, like you want to not look, and you kind of pump up this notion of I'm over it. I'm better by myself. So those are the little things. And whenever someone kind of asks you, like, are you in a relationship or something? It's like, no, 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 no. I'm fine by myself. I don't need one. But at the same time, there was a desire for a relationship. So I very much can identify more with this polarity of fearing and desiring a relationship. Like I completely can tell to everyone, whenever you fear a relationship or don't want it, kind of you can go expecting that there is an actual desire or expectation for one, but we don't like to admit it. And we will discuss why as well. Yeah.
Cool. So you both have had relationships in the past, right? Marlon, you already mentioned it, and Joe, did you also?
Yes, yes. Have had relationships in the past.
Okay, and this whole polarity with on the one side, really wanting a relationship, and on the other hand, feeling like you don't deserve one or not being worthy of a relationship or maybe of the partner. How did that influence your experience or your approach to relationships in the past?
Well, it was a gradual progression, I would say, because it started off with me, very normal, right? Now, wanting a relationship, wanting the emotions and the romance and all of that. But then when it came to actual reality, it didn't play out the way that I thought it would. And things started to come up in my relationships that I at the time was not aware of, meaning unresolved issues from my past, anxieties, fears that I've internalized for a very long time would, rear its head within the relationships that I'd have. And that led me to that progression of eventually getting to a point of getting frustrated with all of it. And I kind of made like a mathematical assessment of like, okay, I want the intimacy and the closeness and the companionship this much, but how much I anticipate the problems is more like this much. So mathematically, it made more sense to just not just, yeah, it's gonna hurt, I'm gonna get jealous now and then, but isn't it at the end of it all worth it to avoid this much? So that was kind of the reasoning behind that progression for me.
I
Yeah,
can
very
also
interesting.
I can also relate to that aspect of equating. Well, I also want the nice stuff, all the things that, you get to experience mostly at the beginning of the relationship, but also due to past relationships where once that you start, for example, living with a person or spending over a year with one same person, you start obviously getting to not only face the reality of the other person, past the nice feelings and the lovey-dovey stuff at the beginning, and then starts to be a challenge for me. And that's something that in my experience I kind of justify it as I'm not ready for this. I don't really want to get into all the conflict and troubles. I'd rather just stay with the nice and then just break it apart. Like, why do I have to go all the way to something else? And that becomes also a nice way, obviously sarcastically speaking, to evade taking the relationship to the so-called ugly face or the reality of the relationship. So I can definitely say that I have been kind of avoiding, as Joe has mentioned as well, like this phase of the conflict, and more reminding myself of that anytime that I kind of pondered of, wouldn't it be nice? Oh, but then comes the ugly part. So I'd rather just avoid it. So avoidance becomes a pattern in all things related to relationships.
Yeah, I can see that now. Now, one thing I'm looking at is, how they often say that relationships and love brings out the best in you. But what they don't say is that it also brings out the worst in you. It brings out both the best and the worst. And people keep talking about all the positive things and how amazing it is, and you feel fulfilled and great and you can conquer the world. But, all of like these suppressions and all the things you've been keeping inside, they also come out in relationships. Don't ask me why. I don't actually really know. But it happens. And people are not prepared for that. You're preparing for all the good stuff. Finally, I'm going to get it now. But then you see this whole other side that is also coming up. And you're just like, what? That's not what I'm supposed to be getting out of this. What? Oh, there must be something wrong with me. Why is this happening to me? This can't be it. Yeah.
That is one very important aspect, that we don't get to learn the phases of a reality walking through a relationship. Maybe you get from your parents like, oh, you'll get used to the bad stuff, just cope with it. But you don't really, we don't get taught. We don't get any tools of support of how to actually walk through a relationship, or this is going to be your life in a relationship, this phase, this phase, this phase, and learning how to walk through it. So in the first moment, as with anything else in our lives, the moment that we see one conflict, it's like, oh, I don't want it any longer. You're not for me. Sorry, I have to find another person, and goodbye. Like, that was, in a way, part of my story as well. So these bad memories of relationships starts adding these bad negative connotation to anything related to relationships, which then becomes like this armor that I kind of stand up with and say, yeah, this is me. I don't need one. I'm fine by myself alone. And I really felt for like 5-6 years of my life as if I was in a monastery, like I'm focusing on myself, which is it has very positive aspects, which I will also share, but to also be aware of how it is also fueled by all of these justifications of no, I don't need, no, which is also like, well, what am I hiding from? What am I avoiding? Which is an interesting aspect to also look at.
Yeah, very cool. Oh, very cool. Well, this hangout is right on time for me. Thanks. Very good to hear. Thanks, Carlos, for commenting. Please enjoy. And if you have any more questions, ask away. And Joe and Marlon will definitely answer. Thanks for watching. So, Marlon, one point I wanted to ask you about as well, going back a bit to this experience of feeling unworthy for being in a relationship, do you see that it's also affected you in terms of which person or which partner to go into a relationship with? They're maybe choosing a partner that is not actually supportive, or like kind of lowering your standard because you feel that you can't have the person you actually want to be in a relationship with, or you can't really aim that high, or things like that.
Yeah, in terms of that, I've had many relationships in the past where the explanation is actually like I would go down to kind of fetch the person and compromise myself a lot for making that relationship work, for example. And that was mostly also like another pattern that I have of wanting to save or support the other person to the point where I'm not really considering myself. And it happened, this is one thing also to notice, not only with relationships as partners, but also friends. A lot of friendships in that same aspect. One thing that I haven't really like opened up is if it is related to worthiness, because there's like an aspect of me that wants to hold on to the potential or the good stuff that a person might have, but if that person is really not going to do it for themselves, of course it becomes a drag and it becomes a bad experience to pile up into the history of relationships, which I then would use as once again an excuse of it's not worth it, I'd just rather be their friend and why bother any further. But in terms of at the same time considering a better person or something like that, there's also judgments into that, like is that person really, like, are they honest with themselves, or maybe they're not really like up for me, or I'm this particular kind of person, I don't want someone like that. So when preference also becomes an obstacle, and personalities, in my case it was a lot of that. For example, the partner that I have now has nothing to do with my personalities or likes, and that's very supportive because it's not like continuing my own history of a particular kind of person that I would choose for relationships, like the artist and people that were, yes, into drugs and music and the whole rest of it. So I was looking for that as well in some way. But, once that you start kind of challenging yourself in many aspects, one starts considering much more than a personality or looks or anything like that. So that is one other aspect. But in terms of worthiness, I would say that in my case it was mostly like because I fuck up the relationship, sorry for the word, if I ruin the relationship, or we just come to a disagreement and end up in bad ways, the person ends depressed, I end up depressed, I'd rather not cause that damage to myself or another. Let's rather just avoid it, prevent it. And that's a good excuse, to also not give it a try any longer and be okay with it.
So it sounds like for both of you, this experience has been there. Like after a few, let's say, attempts and relationship experiences that didn't end up the way you would have hoped, or became disruptive or quite emotionally taxing even, that, they would kind of, every time there was maybe an opportunity or you would consider maybe a relationship again, that these memories just would come up again and kind of haunt you and like, no, don't do it, remember what happens.
Danger, danger, turn away.
All right. So did you guys also have that point of like, okay, with all of these relationships, failing to call it that way, all this pattern always repeating. Did you feel that there was something wrong with you, or did you start looking at, okay, what is it about me then? Maybe there's just something wrong with me, or maybe there's something I keep creating over and over again. Let me investigate that. Joe, did you have that?
Yeah, big time. I went into a point of, in the beginning, I was very just generally angry, comparing myself to other people and not understanding, okay, why am I seeing all of these other people that seem to have it together? And yeah, they may have some problems, but they work it out, and they generally stay very happy and supportive as a couple. And I just would get frustrated because that had never been my experience within relationships. And it was only later on when I started to look back at myself and really get honest with myself that I started to see, okay, the common thread in all of my relationships is me. I was the one creating the same problems. It cannot be all of these other people in all these other parts of the world from all these different walks of life creating the same patterns. That doesn't make any sense. It has to be me. And when I got myself to that point, I started to look again at, people that I've been in relationships before. I would see, they've moved on and they found other partners, and some of them got married, some of them started new lives, some of them, look very happy and content. So that really was a hard pill to swallow because it showed me, what, all this time that I spent blaming them, all of this time that I spent saying how much they did or didn't do to make the relationship work, I wasn't owning up to my half of it equally. And it was only after that that I started to realize, I am the one that needs to be doing a lot of changing here. I'm the one that needs to um, really understand why and how I'm creating these points, but more importantly, to not judge them or judge myself for having issues and problems and points where I need to do more work. Because I think if anything anyone can really take away from my experience so far is that the self-judgment of all of these things is such a heavy weight, and it really makes it impossible for you to be happy even with yourself. You might try to convince yourself you're happier alone, but you're not. And that weight just will keep at you for so long until you really get to that point of firstly embracing yourself and getting to a point where you're okay with facing what you need to do for yourself so that you can correct the past and stop recreating it.
Very
I'd like
cool,
to
Joe.
add to that because that also relates to that phase where after like a series of relationships that didn't go well and where I did go into blaming and finding all the fault in the other people, that's where, because I made of relationships like my point in this process of self-change, meaning my weakness, my nitty-gritty point that I was always like in trouble with. I created a relationship with relationships of avoidance. I don't want to go there because that's my weakness. So what I did, and I decided like for myself, is look, just for this amount of time, you're just not going to be looking for relationships, but deal with yourself, being with yourself, getting comfortable with being alone, working with your own mind patterns. So yes, there has been a lot of writing about the relationships, realizing my own side responsibility in the situation, because in my mind I realized that I was like vilifying most people that I had been in a relationship with without seeing how I accepted, allowed it, created it entirely. So that was a supportive time, and I would actually recommend to anyone that is having this similar experience to rather take this time of being alone and not having a relationship for yourself to get comfortable with being alone, writing yourself, learning, being developing self-honesty, which means understanding how one creates a relationship, in which side we were at that time, which is usually blaming the other person, and rather shifting that point back to self, which means, okay, I realize I did this, I didn't do that, and learning from it. So what I did is also through the relationship agreement course in the IP, it was very supportive to also be able to get comfortable with, okay, a relationship is not really only about finding a person out there that I want to be with. It's just a 1+1 person. I have to be whole, accepting myself, embracing myself, loving myself, if you will, and then be able to kind of join ways with another, but not seeking appreciation, seeking validation through another, because that was mostly my case. Now I realize, of course, on your question. So through realizing that, I saw, okay, so now I focus on myself, and that was very supportive, like really learning to enjoy myself for quite a few years, to the point where I kind of was like, okay, I'm kind of ready to start sharing myself with another. But I couldn't have done it if I had not kind of deconstructed my relationship with the word relationships. So that is something that I would simply place as, do it for yourself, because in the end we have to be comfortable being alone. It's obviously, and I can say it's very cool to be walking with another, but at the same time, we're still two individuals. So we have to be comfortable accepting ourselves, supporting ourselves individually, no matter what. And that first relationship really comes with ourselves. So definitely to create it, first of all.
Cool. So, like you said, Marlene, you had that period of time where you felt like you were in a monastery, like no relationships, no nothing, where maybe partly it was avoidance and not wanting to have anything to do with it. But on the other hand, actually having that time with yourself might have also benefited you. It sounds like it, that you also use it very constructively, and instead of looking at relationships with people out there, use the time to work on your relationship with yourself, which, you know, is the most important one. You're always gonna, no matter where you are or when you are, you're always gonna have yourself with you. So if that relationship is not sorted, then you already know what is going to happen. And Joe,
also,
did you also experience that?
I'd like to add something,
Yeah.
Because it sounds like I was like very, very okay with it, like working with myself. But I did struggle a lot with the constant, sometimes obsessing about a particular person or fantasizing about what a relationship could be. Nothing settled in my reality. But just to point out that it is part of the whole process of fear and desiring a relationship, that as much as you have to focus on deconstructing those desires for it, those fears through it, you will be facing them on a daily basis, as it was in my case for a long time, until through working it on a constant basis, you get more comfortable with not having it as a constant thing in your mind. Like this, there's something missing, but you no longer experience that. So just to clarify that it is a little bit tough process as well, learning to be alone and to work with and self-forgive all of these desires as well at the same time, obsessions, ideas, fantasies, because one tends to go there very much if you're alone in that sense of, I don't have a relationship. So yeah, that was it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I can relate to that. Those experiences of attraction towards a person, they can be so overwhelming. It's like you really have to stand. If you in that moment don't want to follow this attraction, or you've already said like, okay, I'm taking this time for myself. Yeah, it's tough, definitely. So Joe, did you also experience that, like a period of time where you were alone, no relationships, but then also used it to deconstruct your own patterns and sort out your relationship with yourself?
Yeah, for me, I also had that point of, obviously there was a lot more to the decision, meaning it wasn't entirely just a really practical decision. It was also layers of me not wanting at all to ever be with another person, and all the fears and everything behind that. But yes, there was a period where I did very much only focus on myself. And that was during a time in my life where there were many other things that were also not going quite well. I was not in a good position generally in my world. So I spent a great deal of time only focusing on me. And yes, the temptation was always there You know, it doesn't go away. You're always going to see people that you're going to have fantasies about and dream about and wonder what if, but maybe, but if I could just only. You know, that's always going to be there. But what I ended up doing was I made peace with the fact that, yes, these desires aren't going to go away, but I've made a decision to not repeat the mistakes again and to not allow myself to compromise myself again, because it really isn't worth it to do that. And I made it a really strong point within me to get my life back together, you know, focused really hard on working, getting a job, and working my way up, and you know, developing a really strong sense of self-reliance, self-trust, you know, all of the things that in a way I was waiting for relationships to give me, you know, all of the comforts and the reassurances that I wanted from other people, I had to learn how to develop for myself. And that is something that I'm really grateful for giving to myself. So yeah, through that period of self-development and focusing on myself and really attending to my life as though, you know, it really meant something to me, that made a huge difference in terms of the way I look at myself, my self-confidence, and all of those things. And now I'm able to shift back into, okay, I've shown myself that I can really trust myself. And when I make a decision, I'll live through it and make it work. And that's something that's going to stay with me whether I get into a relationship or not. And that's something I'm really grateful for.
Very cool. We have a comment here. It's again from Carlos. He says, I'm working in an interesting point on my blog that I can see that I bring some old patterns to put me in a comfort zone, because I'm also working on my DIP course, the big subject of fear, and I was trying to avoid to walk through it, and I was. Carlos, I'm not sure if your sentence ends there or if there's more you want to add on. So if there's more, just place another comment. But yeah, you know, fear, both desire and fear, are like those two basic, huge, on the one hand, motivators and inhibitors. You know, your desire is a big motivator. If there's attraction, desire, you're going to want to go for it. You're going to want to move yourself to fulfill that desire. And if there's fear, you're going to inhibit yourself. You're going to stop yourself, get paralyzed. And, you know, once you move yourself to a point of saying, okay, this is desire, that is fear, you can isolate it, discharge the energies, where you say, okay, now let me look at the practicalities. Let me look at all the information. Let me consider what is supportive, what's not supportive. Can I learn something here? Is this going to compromise me or not? Then you start moving yourself, directing yourself, and from that, creating your world in alignment to what is best for you and what is best for everyone. So fear is a biggie, and it comes up in relationships, comes up in every part of your life. So working on fear, go for it, Carlos. It's going to help you so much in all aspects of your life.
I just want to jump in here, if I may. It's really interesting, this point that you mentioned, Carlos. Again, if there's more to your comment, please do place it here so we can answer the full context. But what I noticed was you used the phrase comfort zone. And it's really interesting, isn't it, that we say that it's our comfort zone when most of the time that zone is extremely uncomfortable. That zone is very limiting. You know, that zone is where we would rather stay in our fears and anxieties and worries than break through it, because apparently the fear of ending all of that is greater than living with the demons that we know. So I definitely encourage you to have a look at that point of the comfort zone and see if that's really something that's giving you comfort.
Cool. Thanks, Joe. Very cool. Okay, he has made another comment, so to add on to it, so he says that he was begging for support, and he realized that thanks to his buddy on the course, it was me, that he was the one that was asking himself for support. And after starting to walking the point, everything becomes more clear to work on it. So the point is that we used to use, and I'm guessing there's another coming. We used to use relationships to avoid work in ourselves. Gracias. Yes,
Absolutely.
exactly. You've got it.
I can actually relate a lot to having lived in relationships, not only relationships, partnership, but also friendships, where I wasn't living my life at all. I was like this constant companion, servant, always there for them to whatever they were going to be doing with their lives and so forth. And only when I realized, okay, what was I doing? What was I deciding for myself throughout all that time? It was not much. So that's kind of one point where one comes into this realization of, well, is a relationship a way to avoid myself, fear being alone, and not wanting to kind of even at that time be able to face my own fears, my own thoughts. So definitely, that's why I would also suggest that if, for example, you're currently not in a relationship, Carlos, to take this moment to really work on yourself, and as Might explained, kind of discharge these fears, these desires, so that then when the time opportunity comes up, you can clearly make a decision, not even based on an emotion moving you, or a need, or a want, or these fluffy experiences coming up within you upon someone, but really get to know someone, really get to communicate and see who you are within it, which means not fearing it from past relationship memories, because that's a real fuck up. I even now tend to go into that same place and have to work through it. It's a constant work to let go of the past, as Joe was mentioning, becomes a huge baggage of self-judgment around it. So we really have to live it day by day, correcting that, and at the same time realizing that it is you that has the ultimate decision of, okay, do I trust myself walking into this relationship or not? Do I need more work on myself? And as points emerge, you go working with them. So that is a fascinating aspect, that we don't know, like, okay, now I said my announcement, I'm ready for a relationship. No, we actually don't know. And in my case, I even avoided it. When it got to that point of, hey, maybe this could be, I was like, no, I'm really fine by myself. I really don't want this. But I kind of decided that I cannot go avoiding this for the rest of my life. So let's give it a try. Life is here to also learn, be okay with making mistakes, and that's something that I keep working on. That if I make a decision, okay, I can trust myself that I live it, I learn from it, I learn from the past in terms of the things that I didn't do, bring them forth here, and also become part of a new expression in myself. So they're very supportive in that sense, relationships and also being alone. It all depends on how we decide to live those phases of not being in a relationship or being comfortable alone, and that can be for the rest of your life, or if you decide to be in a relationship but not to have either or, alone or with a relationship definition to define who you are within yourself. So I think that's the most important thing when we're talking about this topic as well.
It definitely is. And I mean, with relationships, many times people lose themselves in relationships, their sense of self, who I am, where 6 months, a year, 2 years down the line, they look back and go, I've been chipping away pieces of myself. I don't even recognize myself anymore. What happened? So, and that's also one point I've observed with people who have been together for a really long time, who have supportive relationships, is that they have kept that stance and that sense of self and that self-support and reflecting on what you're experiencing for yourself, so that the focus is not so much on the relationship and building the experiences together and doing fun things for the other, but to always remember it's me and you. We're two individuals. I'm supporting me, but I'm also supporting you within that. You're supporting you and you're supporting me within that. So it is tricky. And if you know within yourself that you have that pattern within relationships of focusing too much on the other, looking for the other person to fulfill you, to complete you, to fix you, then it could be supportive to be alone with yourself for a while, to just practice that point of saying, I am okay. Whatever I need, I can create it. I can develop it for myself, inside myself. At the same time, you could do it while in a relationship. It might just be more challenging It might take a bit more time, or you'll have to walk it in a bit of a different way. It both is doable. So it's for you and yourself to assess. I mean, you know yourself best always. So you can always assess that and direct that for yourself practically. Very cool discussion that opened up here. There is one more point, Joe, that I wanted to ask you about. You know, we talked about how when relationship patterns repeat over and over, where over several relationships you experience the same points, the same problems start surfacing, that you start looking at, okay, well, what is this showing me about me, which you've talked about. But there's also a point that is often missed or not considered, how the most fundamental and also the first relationships that we create in our reality, our relationships with our parents, often play a role in how we approach relationships later in life, that determine and influence who we are in relationships later in life. Did you see any of those dynamics at play?
Absolutely. And this is actually something I only recently really dug into, because it's such a common thing, isn't it? That we see in media. It's the scene of somebody going to a psychiatrist or a therapist, and the therapist says, "Tell me about your mother." But it's really relevant because I looked at this point of who am I within my relationships with women, intimate, personal relationships. And I went all the way through the people I've dated, and then it hit me, well, what about the first relationship I ever developed with a female, which is my mother? And what unlocked was this whole history of, I had what I would consider to be a difficult childhood. And my relationship with my mother was always very conflictual. And there was long patterns of physical, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, which I internalized. And that created a template that I would later in life continually repeat and recreate. Patterns of feeling unworthy, feeling like I'm not good enough, fearing impending abandonment, fearing, all kinds of, dominance from this strong female character. And in relation to that, I am this subordinate, weak person whose only role is to be subservient. This became the main theme in, I would say, almost all of my future relationships with women. So it's one of those things where you really have to look at it and really work on forgiving yourself for what is still, imprinted in you from all of those experiences way back in childhood that you may still be acting out because it hasn't been directed. It's still controlling you, and in many ways you're still maybe subconsciously trying to avoid the same pains, the same issues, and you're using the same tactics that you've used before during your childhood, which for me was to go into isolation, to close myself off emotionally, to stop sharing my feelings because I would get in trouble if I did. All of those tactics that I learned then were the same tactics I continued using later in life. And what was interesting was when I did a bit of research, I found that for men who have had troubled relationships with their mothers in early childhood, it is very difficult to cultivate supportive, nurturing, intimate relationships with other females. And unfortunately, we have a society that is more willing to accept daughters who have had troubled relationships with their mothers than it is to accept men who have had troubled relationships with their mothers. So there is a big social stigma, and all of this does play into many reasons for why perhaps other men like myself may feel ashamed or may feel like it's wrong to even investigate this. It's wrong to admit that perhaps we needed a certain kind of nurturing. Perhaps we needed a certain kind of softness, a kind of motherly love that we were denied and that we have a right to. So I just want to share that point for anybody out there that may relate to my experiences, to not let the judgments or the social taboos keep you from giving you what you need to give yourself.
Very cool. Thank you, Joe, for that. No, that is important, hey. There's many topics that are so common that almost everyone experiences, but that is simply not talked about because everyone thinks they're the only one. And then there's no support out there. You don't know who to reach out to, you know? Like, what do I do with this? You think you're the only person in the world who's experiencing that. But then, you know, you talk to someone, you start developing more intimate communication and relationships. It doesn't have to be romantic, just friendships, you know. Once you kind of get to a more intimate level, you start sharing more of what you really experience and what you know, have been feeling and harboring inside yourself. You'll find many people experience the same problems. So opening these topics up for discussion, support, it's very important. I mean, I also experienced that in my relationships, but then it was in relation to my dad. I had quite a conflictuous relationship with my father, and in my current relationship with my partner, this was when maybe we were a year together or so. Everything was actually really stable, really quiet, really peaceful. Everything was going great. But because I was used to conflict, I thought something was wrong. So I kind of started like creating conflict with my partner. And it wasn't until someone pointed out to me, stop, hello, you're turning him into your father. That's what you're creating now because of your experience of relationships in the past when you were a child with your dad, where you think that is normal and life is not normal unless there's conflict and you know, fights and violence going on. So, you know, it's really hard to spot those points. So I think it's really cool that it opened up in this hangout as well for people to start considering that, like, if you have these repeating patterns that are coming up in your relationships, the same types of dynamics, the same type of experiences, problems, you can also look at your relationship with your mother or father. It is cliche, you know, it sounds really cliche, like you said, Joe, you know, mommy issues, daddy issues. But there's a reason for that. It's because very often that does lie at the base in some way or another. So
I'd
that is
like
a
to
very
add
cool
something.
suggestion.
I
Yeah,
was
go
actually
for it.
talking with my sister yesterday about certain relationship that has developed at home or in my core family, and we were discussing a lot about the presence of my mother and how she wasn't like this very sweet and like very loving mother at all. And it kind of like just yesterday it made me kind of ponder, I actually don't recall at all that like sense of love and appreciation, and maybe that also influenced in me seeking that kind of appreciation or acceptance or that kind of experience through seeking a relationship. So in my case it wasn't so much with my father, but maybe also this point with my mother, like not having that sense of embrace and care that I would see other mothers would do with their children, for example, and how I maybe at some unconscious level sought that in relationships. And the same happened with one of my sisters, for example, or maybe both, who knows. But it is cool to also open up these kind of discussions as well, if one cannot see it for oneself, to see, oh, how did it go with my siblings, if you have any, and that can also
Yeah.
generate like a supportive conversation with them.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like I have a sister, and so many times we go through the same things, and we don't even know it about each other unless we actually talk. And it's like, oh, we have to talk more often because I can exactly relate to that. You know, just last
Exactly.
week I was going through this or through that. So that is a very cool support platform. And often sisters, you know, there's like this love-hate relationship competition that's often, you know, is at play. But if you can get through that, same with brothers, I imagine. I don't know. I've never been a brother to someone. But if you can get through that and really, you know, develop that communication, you know, you've lived so much of your life in the same environment with the same people. You are both influenced, or all three, or all four, however many you grew up with. You have those points in common. You, in some way or another, are influenced by that. And you'd be surprised to see how similar, you know, you actually might be, you know, on a deep level. So that's a very cool suggestion. Thanks, Marlon, for bringing that up. We have one more comment from Carlos. He says, give to yourself any other time space is basic. Cool. Yeah, I mean, that with relationships is something that you learn, is to move and work in space time. You don't just have yourself with all your experiences, which can all go really, really fast. In relationships, you have to pace yourself and communicate and walk the points through, and so both understand it. So that is a very cool gift that relationships also do bring. We have gone through a lot of suggestions already that has opened up through the conversations. Does either of you still have points you really want to mention and suggest to people who might be able to relate to this experience and this belief and conviction that relationships are not for them?
I'd first say very quickly to not judge yourself for not having a relationship, to not think that because everyone else does, you're wrong or you're flawed or you're a loser or you're probably never going to get any relationship, no one will want you, because that's also a tough layer of self-judgment to get out from. So rather, I would say to change the perspective into that time that you either give to yourself as a decision or because you just broke up with someone, to use it for yourself, which is what we have mentioned already. So just that same point of not to judge yourself, and instead rather prepare yourself. What would you like to create? Use of your past experiences and lessons learned into any relationship, or what would you like to create if that's what you want. But also, you know, exploring the possibility of, well, if you're okay, sincerely okay being alone, which means realizing that, you know, I truly don't need a relationship, or I truly, you know, I'm fine with myself, and to be okay with that, while not shutting the door, because then that becomes also the same pattern again. So just like that, you know, open to possibilities, and willing to work through those initial reactions of, you know, oh, there's a possibility, I'd rather not go there. No, go there, walk through it, test yourself. Like, this life is precisely here for us to kind of go for it there, obviously in the responsible way. Don't go too far without considering consequences, but simply in that stance of, okay, I'm putting myself to test, to challenge. Yeah. So that would be the point.
Yeah, I definitely agree right there, 100%, Marlene. It's very much, to do with self and getting to a space where you really are okay being in a relationship or not. Either way, there shouldn't be something tugging at you. And for example, if you have come out of a string of bad relationships, I think it is a good idea to spend some time for yourself and get to know yourself. I remember a while ago, while I was in this process, I mentioned to a friend of mine, I think I found somebody. I think this might be the one. And they said, really? Who? And I said, me. I think I might be the one that I'm going to be okay spending the rest of my life with. And that was a cool moment because it's it allowed me to start looking at, okay, you know what? Yeah, I've proven that I can be alone and I can take care of myself, and I don't actually need somebody else to be something for me that I wasn't willing to be for myself. But if that's off the table, that leaves an open space to create a relationship based not on what I want from another, but based on what I can share with another, based on what kind of new things can I create with someone else that I couldn't create alone. And those are cool things to consider. And if you find yourself in that space where you're still reacting to people or new opportunities, or if somebody new enters your world and your reaction is fear, you got to have a look at that and get past that so that you can make a real decision. You don't want to automatically say, no, that's not, relationship's bad. No, not for me. You want to rather get past that automatic reaction and rather look at the situation. Okay, well, do I know this person? Am I willing to get to know this person? Am I willing to let this person get to know me? Would this actually be practical for both of us? And those are real questions, and you can have a look at. And if you really honestly consider those things, then you don't have to rely on fears to justify why you don't get into a relationship. You're rather directing yourself. You're making a real choice based on what's actually best for you to not entertain a certain relationships. And that's a big difference that I encourage everybody to get to.
And actually, once that you walk through all of these points that we've mentioned, you get so much better prepared to also face now the relationship if it opens up. Like you're so much more well equipped to walk through the difficulties, the conflictive aspects that will emerge right away later on, depends on the relationship. And you then realize, hey, maybe it wasn't never really about him or me being the problem, but it's really about how I wasn't like standing in that self-trust and just being prepared generally to work with the points that need to be worked with, correct yourself in certain things, communicate, lots of communication. So the whole point is, in essence, to say that walking this process of self-change, self-support, learning how to equip oneself to face things in life, it really becomes a great difference to how relationships were in my experience in the past to what they are now. Now I see it is more as my point to walk and face rather than making it too much about the other or seeing too much the problem in the other. No, it's more about me, what I learn of myself, what I can change in myself, what I can reference share. But it is a complete different experience, and this could even be another topic for a hangout, but I find it very relevant so that we don't hold on to those memories that haunt us. Like I was told literally, your memories are haunting you. So I was like, oh, shit, So we really have to work through that and then realize that once that one is like really willing to work with oneself in one relationship, the experience throughout it is much more different, completely new, I would say, in my case currently. So yeah, that would be it.
Very cool. And yeah, I agree. It was the same for me. Like anything I thought I had learned in relationships before, it's like I could just throw it all away because nothing really applied anymore. Once you actually start creating and directing together with your partner, it's a whole different story. It's not comparable. All right, thanks, guys. This was a very long and very cool discussion. If anyone else out there that's still watching or going to be watching on YouTube later, if you have any questions or comments that you want to, contribute, please make a comment on the video and I'll ask Joe or Marlon to answer, or I'll answer it myself. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Joe, Marlon, thank you so much for being here. This was awesome. Have a good evening or a good day, Marlon.
Thank you. Nice to spend it with you guys anytime.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.